All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is day 10 still, part 2, day 10, and episode 11, as we're covering the 11th 4VKM video on this 40 days of 4VKM. And I told you this is one of my favorites coming up, the Gridiron Gang, right? And the title has a very specific meaning, Grid, Space, Iron, Space Gang. Generally, gridiron is spelled all one word. But we're talking about a grid that's gone online and a gang that kind of activated at this one point in time in life, in the world, and the universe to kind of tell a story and get some messages out there and some signals out for people to slowly wake up a little bit, right? So we'll start off. Gridiron Gang Saves America is the official title. Find it on Rumble. There's 4 episodes, so this is going to be number uno. And the release date of this video was 9/10/2020. Now, 9/10/2020, I believe it was the NFL kickoff that weekend. I believe that was a Sunday, or it was NFL kickoff weekend for sure. And that was in 2020. So we had football kind of starting up here, right? So when we had football, it really made me think of kind of the war that Donald Trump has always had on the NFL, right? So the video starts off 9/10/1990. There's a TV show. You know what the TV show is called? Trump Card. It was called Trump Card, and it came to you live from Trump Castle, and it was hosted by Jimmy Cephalo. Jimmy Cephalo I actually met one time. He's the host of a morning show, AM Talk Radio, I think 610 WIOD, South Florida. And I was doing some advertising with iHeartMedia, so I got invited out to their studio there. And I was in the booth while he was live on the air, gave him a wave. He gave a little wave back. So my little crossing points with Jimmy Cephalo there, I want to say that was 2016, so many years ago. But got to get that little meetup right there, which was cool. And then as I'm doing this research, I'm like, holy crap, Jimmy Cephalo is in the video. So Jimmy Cephalo, he was a former, I believe, Miami Dolphins player. He was number 81. Flip it, 18, right? And he's the host of this show. Donald Trump comes out for the first episode, and he says, Jimmy, glad to be on your team, right? So then we kick forward and we show, we like to show parallel stories here. And there is a parallel story of Donald Trump and Vince McMahon versus the NFL, going back again to the 80s, right? So it started with Donald Trump investing into a alternative league, and he bought a team, the New Jersey Generals. So the New Jersey Generals, they were his team. The player that everybody knows from that is Herschel Walker. He was their one of their best players, and you could see clips of him with Trump back there in the 80s. He had a quarterback. I can't remember the quarterback's name. I should have looked it up beforehand. But I can tell you that the quarterback's number that he wore was number 17. And you see that in the thumbnail on YouTube, or on Rumble, actually. You see the jersey there, number 17. So that's always fun. I think his name was Bob. Bob something. I can't remember, though. So you have Trump kind of, in this other league, trying to compete with the NFL, right? Is looking for an alternative to the NFL. Actually tried to buy an NFL team a couple times. Tried to buy the Patriots even. I think he tried to buy the Buffalo Bills as well. So he was always trying to get in, couldn't get in. So then he tried some other stuff, right? Simultaneously, WrestleMania 2, you had the WWF versus the NFL in a battle royal. And I think this is won by William the Refrigerator Perry. Or it might have been won by Andre. Refrigerator Perry was in it for sure. I don't remember who won it. But you have the NFL versus the WWF in the ring, right? You have all these football players in the ring versus NFL stars, which is pretty cool, right? So then you fast forward, we go on a little bit here. There's some more WWF versus NFL. The main event at WrestleMania 11 is Lawrence Taylor, LT, versus Bam Bam Bigelow, who R.I.P. We just celebrated, or not celebrated, but we just had his 17th anniversary of his passing just a few days ago. So R.I.P. to the Beast from the East, Bam Bam Bigelow. So that was the main event, WrestleMania 11. You also see Robert Kraft get introduced into things here. So Robert Kraft purchased the New England Patriots, I want to say in 1994. Good friend of Donald Trump, as you see throughout the years as well. So, the New England Patriots are under new ownership now, and they had never won anything for the most part up in their history up till this point. They used to be the Boston Patriots, and I remember my dad telling me they even used to play games at Fenway Park back in the day. So if you didn't know that, look that up. So the New England Patriots, and I remember as a kid hearing the rumors, we were really worried that they were going to move the Patriots from Massachusetts to Connecticut to build a new stadium there. Ultimately, that didn't happen. They decided to build a new stadium at Gillette, in Foxborough, Gillette Stadium, and the Patriots have been there ever since. So you got Kraft now owning the Patriots. Trump took a look at it at some point as well. You have WWF versus the NFL, and then that brings us up to 2000, where Vince McMahon announces that, what happened to his old football, right? What happened to that smash mouth football that we know and love, right? And that's where Tom Brady that year gets drafted by the New England Patriots in the 6th round, I believe, out of Michigan. We know what happens with that guy. Then you have, in 2001, the launch of the XFL, Vince McMahon's football league, right? And the ratings for this show were just astronomical. It broke ratings records when they first debuted the XFL. The problem with the XFL, there's two problems with the XFL, the original XFL. It was not the best football, right? So I think when you want to tune into football, you want to see good football, right? And these weren't NFL players, right? So they weren't the best players in the world. The football was so-so, right? So then Vince tried to kind of make it more about entertainment. He'd do stuff. Check out halftime. We're going into the cheerleaders' locker room. He would go back to the old WWF Attitude playbook. I think he even had Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler on commentary doing football. And I think he actually even had Jesse the Body Ventura doing commentary for the XFL as well. While he was governor, I think. He was still governor while this was going on. So very interesting connections there. But what ultimately did the XFL in, was 9/11. So you have 9/11 happen in 2001. And XFL, I don't think they came back after that. Now, they weren't in season. They were a spring league. But, it kind of marked the end of it. They were one and done at that point. And that kind of goes in the future, too. Vince brings back the XFL. You'll see at the end of the video. And really, the end of that XFL was COVID being shutting down everything, right? So you have 9/11 kind of, the marker to end the first XFL, and COVID the marker to end the second XFL. So, so we got all that going on. Trump and McMahon versus the NFL for all those years. And they're having a good time. Then 9/11 happens, right? And we talked about it in the first episode, how the first public assembly after 9/11 was WWE SmackDown that Thursday after 9/11 from Houston, Texas. And you see clips here of the national anthem being sung by Lillian Garcia at the opening of that show. Very patriotic display. You have all the wrestlers on the stage. Who do you have front and center? You have Vince McMahon at the top of the stage, at the front, in front of everybody. And who's to his right-hand side? It's The Rock, right? Both with their hands over their hearts, right? So he's putting The Rock front and center there for you. You have Stone Cold Steve Austin, who's a bad guy at this time. He's out there waving an American flag. You have Kurt Angle, American hero, Olympic champion, gold medal winner in 1996, represented the United States in that. He's front and center, and it's a very, very patriotic moment that will go down in WWE history. So while you're seeing this montage of the WWE wrestlers paying their tributes after 9/11, you also see the NFL players during the same time period and how they were, paying tribute same way during national anthems and whatnot. And it's a stark contrast because think about where we were in 2020, the summer of love, as I like to call it, right? And you had all the controversy with the kneeling during the national anthem and all this stuff, right? What a stark difference it was 20 years ago when every player, this entire country was united behind a cause. Now, we can debate how that cause came about and this whole, Patriot movement, this patriotic call to go to war, essentially. That's a story for another day, right? But at the end of the day, whatever you want to say caused it, the country was very united during that period of time. And it was a very stark contrast to, 19 years later in the year 2020. So we have all that. And then from there, we're going to talk about The Rock, right? Now, a lot of people in this community do not like The Rock, right? And they go back to the SNL clips that he had about the child molesting robot. And they go back to some different things he said, eating kids and whatnot. And let me just remind everybody, right? That's the opposite of projection. Generally, these people use projection, right? So they accuse other people of doing what they're actually doing. They very rarely are like, yeah, I do this. I eat kids, right? So I molest children with a robot, right? Very rarely do they actually come out and say it like that, right? So I am under the belief that Rock, just like John Cena has been, just like Hulk Hogan was in the 80s and the 90s, these guys go to Hollywood as, you want to call it double agents, you want to call it white hat spies, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, I don't see a lot of people bullying these guys behind the scenes, right? So I think it's an operation at the end of the day. You can disagree with me. Don't hate me for it, right? But you'll see later on Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon talking about the long history between the Rock's family and the McMahon's family. It starts off with Vince saying, remember we were talking about the corporation. Well, who was Vince McMahon's main champion in the corporation? It was The Rock, right? He gave The Rock the WWF championship, and then he became his guy, right? And Vince even has this speech where he goes, "He's always been my champion," right? So even up till now, The Rock is still Vince's guy, right? There was a couple years ago where Vince was doing backstage segments and he would just have a poster of The Rock backstage. Now, The Rock wasn't around. He wasn't coming back during this time, right? But he was always a Rock guy, right? And you know who else was a Rock guy? Donald J. Trump. So Shane McMahon, he goes through the bloodline history of The Rock, right? It goes down to his grandfather, Peter Maivia, his father, Rocky Johnson. Yokozuna was related to The Rock. We talked about Umaga. He was related to The Rock. The Usos, who are in the WWF today. The current longest reigning WWE undisputed Universal Champion, Roman Reigns, cousin to The Rock, right? So there's a very long working relationship between the Rock's family and the McMahon's family, right? Roman Reigns' father, Afa, was WWE Hall of Famer, tag team the Wild Samoans with Sika. So you have all these bloodline ties here with The Rock and the long history with the McMahon family as well. And so that kind of leads us to the next part, right? So the first wrestling event that I ever attended, it was King of the Ring 2000 in Boston, Massachusetts. So I'll never forget, very top row at what we'll call the 50-yard line of the arena, right? So smack dab middle of the arena. It's called the Fleet Center at the time. I remember the old the yellow walls at the top of the arena, right? And we were the very last row. My mom took me to this event. It was the first time I ever went to a wrestling event, a WWE event. And I remember it like it was yesterday, right? It was such a beautiful memory. And it was for a pay-per-view, King of the Ring 2000, right? So a big event. And Kurt Angle wins the King of the Ring at this event, which was pretty cool to see. And you also have a main event, which had never really been done before, but it's going to be a 6-man tag team match for the WWF Championship. And at the time, Triple H is the WWF champion, and he's aligned with, his father-in-law in storyline at this time, not in real life. That happens later on. And his brother-in-law, Shane McMahon, right? So it's Triple H and the McMahons versus The Rock, The Undertaker, and Kane for the WWE Championship. And whoever scores the fall, they will be the WWE Champion, right? So at this point, The Undertaker had just returned from End of an Era, First Blood. Remember we talked about that yesterday, right? So at that point, during the End of the Era, First Blood, that was kind of the end of The Undertaker's current era at that point. He was the dead man as everybody knew him at, but during this time in 1999, he was actually a really evil version of that, that did like sacrifices, and he led a group called the Ministry of Darkness, which was very occult-like and satanic and whatnot. And again, they're showing you kind of what's going on. That group merged with the corporation, right? So you had Satanism basically merging with corporate America, and boom, they're showing you how things really work behind the scenes, right? So you have The Undertaker. He is out with an injury for several months after End of an Era, First Blood, and he comes back the month before at Judgment Day pay-per-view in May at Freedom Hall, it's called, and he comes out riding a motorcycle with a new gimmick. It is a American Badass gimmick, right? And he actually comes out to Kid Rock's American Badass song, which is hot at the time, right? Well, who comes out to that song 20 years later? Donald J. Trump. Every time he goes to UFC, he comes out to, I'm an American Badass, right? That's Donald Trump's song. So you have the American Badass Undertaker teaming with The Rock and Kane. And what ultimately ends up happening, you have The Rock pinning Vince McMahon, his boy, to become the WWE champion. So for me, super cool. I got to see The Rock during his peak almost become WWF champion. Now, earlier in the night, remember, this is my first wrestling event I've ever been to. And you know who they showed on the screen during this very first wrestling event that I went to? It was Donald J. Trump. And Donald J. Trump was at the WWE show the night before at Madison Square Garden, and he was with Melania, who they had just started seeing each other at this point, right? So Melania's there, and the King's talking about it, right? And the King then goes and he interviews him, and he asks him some questions, and he goes, hey, who's your favorite wrestler, right? And Donald Trump goes, well, besides you, King. And I show you a clip years later while Trump's running for president. You have Jerry the King Lawler in the stands behind Trump wearing a Trump shirt at one of his rallies, right? So you have Jerry Lawler, huge Trump fan, and he's interviewing Trump ringside, Madison Square Garden, June 2000, with Melania right there as well. And then Trump goes, well, besides you, if I had to pick anybody, I would say The Rock, right? So there you have Donald Trump telling you The Rock's his favorite wrestler. Now, people change, right? I haven't seen Donald Trump mention a favorite wrestler since then. So as far as I'm concerned, The Rock is Donald Trump's favorite wrestler still. Now, you can disagree with that if you want. Right? Go back to the SNL clip if you want, right? But, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. So you have Trump, talking about The Rock. You have The Rock winning the WWE Championship the next night. You have little Mr. Drew there cheering it all on and watching, a story unfold that who knew 20 years later I'd be talking about this, right? So, fast forward now, right? 2000, we have Linda McMahon. She is running a political campaign called Smack Down Your Vote. And it is a operation to mobilize WWE fans to go out and vote. Now, they were leaning conservative and Republican, which they'd kind of always had, right? And they were kind of directing us fans that way. And I'll tell you why. If you remember 2000, you had Al Gore and Tipper Gore, and they were all about the TV rating system, right? And it's weird because, they were all about censorship, right? They didn't want, rowdy stuff on television, and the WWF was very rowdy at this time. So there's a character named Brent Bozell, or as I like to call him, Brent Bozo. And Brent Bozell was in charge of a group called the PTC, the Parent Teacher Council, right? And they were some of the harshest critics of the WWE. Similar to what you see today, they'd go after the advertisers and they'd try to do the boycotts and they would do the smear campaigns and all this stuff, right? And then what ends up happening is the Republican National Convention that year, they invite The Rock to come and speak, right? The Rock's always been a Republican. So we know he endorsed Biden. You'll see that in the next Gridiron Gang. But The Rock has always publicly, for the most part, been a Republican and even spoke at the 2000 DNC. So you have that. You have The Rock make this speech at the DNC. You have him basically saying, it seems like you're trying to court The Rock's 14 million fans that watch him every single week and are eligible to vote. So the WWE was a sizable voting block at this point, right? And they were basically saying like, hey, we got to vote this way because if not, then Al Gore and his wife are going to come in and who knows what they're going to do to kind of affect our product, right? And change the WWE that you also love. So you have The Rock kind of get asked about Brent Bozell. And, he basically defends free speech. Reminded me of the Dana White clip I saw yesterday where he's like, hey, you got a problem with free speech? Brent Bozell, you should try some free speech. You also have the right to censor at the time. And I show you some clips of this. Stevie Richards, who becomes, tied into this. So he was the leader of this group called the RTC, the Right to Censor. And this whole group is making fun of basically the PTC. And a good friend of ours, Jacob Israel, was actually the writer of this group and of this segment. He was a writer for WWE during the time, and he was very hands-on in this group. So we're going to talk to him eventually on the 4VKM podcast and really go into depth with this. But again, very big part of the story. And you'll see Stevie Richards come back later in the episode as well. So you have the right to censor in 2000. Kind of funny because, all these years later, what are we talking about? The same stuff, trying to censor people, right? So I always joke, if they came back in this day and age, they'd be, heat magnets at the end of the day because, nobody likes censorship. Well, I guess the censors like censorship, but, regular people don't. So, where were we? We talked about The Rock at the RNC, right? So then now the story's going to kick over to the New England Patriots, right? So the New England Patriots, they are, like I had mentioned before, they never won anything up until this point. They get Tom Brady in. If you remember, Drew Bledsoe had the injury. Tom Brady comes in at the end of the year, leads them on this winning streak. Becomes a QB controversy. Who's going to be the QB? Bill Belichick sticks with his guy Brady, and the rest is history at the end of the day, right? So you see Tom Brady was a guest at one of George W. Bush's State of the Union addresses, right? So again, they were kind of leveraging these big sports stars to try to really bring out some Republican votes, in my opinion, right? So you have Tom Brady. They win Super Bowl 36. It's the first Super Bowl after 9/11. Now, I think, in my opinion, this is kind of where, like, I woke up a couple years after this fact, but it was very suspicious to me that this team came out of nowhere. Tom Brady came out of nowhere, and then they win the Super Bowl. They're the Patriots, right? They're wearing red, white, and blue, and I'll never forget the NFL Films documentary, and they go, the team flying highest was wearing red, white, and blue, right? And it was, again, it was a way to get us all, rallied up for America, right? And patriotism took over, and the Patriots dynasty begins, right? And you see it then for the next several years. Now, interesting thing about that Super Bowl 36 is I think they're about to go into overtime, or they did go into overtime. They're about to. I don't remember. It's close, very close. I think time was about to run out, actually. And the score was tied 17-17. And then Adam Vinatieri hits a famous field goal, ends the game, and the New England Patriots become the Super Bowl champions. They take a year off from that. I think the Bucs won it the next year. And then they're right back at it, winning Super Bowl after Super Bowl. At the same time, The Rock's career in Hollywood starts to take off, right? He starts to do more movies. He's starting to phase out of WWE at this point and go more on the Hollywood route. And again, that's just my opinion, but I think that was all planned, and then ultimately probably planned for a political run at some point in the future. And now you're hearing about it more frequently. I was saying that 10 years ago, that The Rock's probably going to be president one day. Because they've created a megastar out of him, right? And it's all about popularity, and it's all about name recognition, right? And there's no better proof than Donald Trump. You can almost say Donald Trump was a beta test for a future Rock candidacy. And what happened? They both came from WWE or had stops through WWE, and they both talk trash very, very well, right? So I think it's a winning formula at the end of the day. We'll see what happens. So there's a clip where The Rock's being interviewed, right? And he says how fascinated he is with the spy world and spy movies, and he loves all that stuff, right? So, noted. But then there's another wrinkle to the story, right? And that's a guy everybody loves, Dave Portnoy, right? So, Dave Portnoy founded Barstool Sports in 2003. So, around the same time, Patriots start winning, right? And, Rock's doing his Hollywood career. Dave's building Barstool. Barstool really blows up later on in the decade. And then it's a conglomerate today, right? So you have Dave Portnoy. He kind of got his start with Barstool by he bought these newspaper stands, right? And a lot of times he would wait outside the T stations and just hand out the newspapers himself, right? Just getting them out to people. He was all print at first. He had the little newsstands. He would give the newspapers out for free, I believe. He just sold advertisements in the newspaper, so that's how he made his money. And there's a clip of him talking about the history of Barstool, and he would talk about how they would leave these newspaper stands at T stops all over Boston. T stops he didn't even know existed, right? And go back to that red line map, right? Those are the T stops right there. Those are some of them, I'm sure. There's a ton of different lines in Boston. There's like 4 or 5 different lines in Boston, but the red line is the most predominant one at the very least. So you have Dave dropping his newspaper off, building his empire, one T stop at a time. And, you have this whole thing going. So what's Dave known for? Dave is also known for now the pizza reviews, right? And I see this as another kind of reclaiming of, the symbols here, or fighting back, reversing the curse, if you will. He does these pizza reviews, and you see some clips of him doing reviews with WWE superstars like John Cena, Stone Cold Steve Austin. You have Tyson Fury, who is a boxer, but he's competed in WWE a couple times. And what's Dave's go-to score? It's 7-1. Oh, wow, 7-1, right? Flip it. And the one that he does with John Cena, what's John Cena's score? 8-9. 8-9. So what's an 8-9? It's a 17, right? So It's just fun. It's just fun, right? We're just having fun here. You have Stone Cold Steve Austin, who is competing for the WWF Championship on 10/8, 2000. 10/8, 2000 or 2001. 2001, I think, right? And it's Monday Night Raw, 10/8. You got an 18 there. And a couple rows behind the front row at ringside, you have a guy holding a sign that says R with an arrow pointing down, right? So R on 10/8, kind of interesting, right? So he was one of the pizza reviews. You see that there. And again, I feel like it's just all kind of reclaiming some of the symbols back and reversing the curse, if you will. Maybe it's all in my head. It's quite possible, right? But I think there's something there. So what do we got? We have The Rock. I talked about the SNL skit that everybody gets upset about. I talked about, there's this scene where he talks about eating children and pineapple, right? So when I heard that, the first thing I thought about was the pineal gland, right? Pineapple, right? So again, I don't think The Rock is admitting to you that he eats children and pineapple in that clip. I think he's throwing it in their faces when he says it. I could be wrong. You guys can hate him all you want, right? But I'm sticking with Donald J. Trump's favorite wrestler right now. So, that's the real deal with The Rock. We have Robert Kraft and Dave Portnoy, what's Dave Portnoy do? He eventually interviews President Trump in 2020, leading up to the presidential election there. You have Robert Kraft famously tell him, it's always been Brady, Belichick, and Portnoy on the rise to the Patriots dynasty there, which I always thought was fun. You got as well, I'm all over the place. There's a lot of stuff in this episode, guys. Ton of stuff in this episode. Payback, right? How can I forget this, right? There's a WWE pay-per-view called Payback, and that's the theme to this song is actually the theme playing in the video here, right? Now, the thing that caught my attention about this event is Stephanie McMahon comes out in this event, the daughter of Vince, right? And what is she wearing? She's wearing a Tiffany blue dress, very Tiffany blue. I don't think I've ever seen her wear this dress at any other point, right? So she comes out wearing Tiffany blue at the Payback show, right? So we see some clips then of, what else was Tiffany blue? Well, the box that JFK Jr.'s ashes supposedly were put in before they were dumped out at sea was a Tiffany blue box, right? So you have that connection there. You have the fact that Jackie Kennedy created the color Tiffany blue, which a lot of people don't know, but so Tiffany blue is kind of like a Kennedy color at the end of the day. You also have the Tiffany Company. They opened up a legit Tiffany blue box store. So it was designed like a Tiffany blue box. And where do they open that up? JFK Airport in New York. Wow. What are the odds of that, right? So you have all the Tiffany blue connections. And then don't forget too, we show you that on Inauguration Day in 2017, you have Melania giving Michelle Obama the Tiffany blue box, which we'll spend some more time on in a future episode too. So last thing I think I forgot was we were talking about Stevie Richards, right? Well, fast forward all those years later after, the RTC, you have Stevie Richards as he was part of a show. I actually ended up going on this show. You'll see that in a future episode. But it's called the Conspiracy Horseman, right? And he would do that with the Greek god Papadon, my man Bin Hamin, and Big Sal from ECW. He was in a group called the FBI, the Full-Blooded Italians, right? So the four of them made up the Conspiracy Horseman. And you get some clips of them talking about the Bush funeral, right? Because we're talking about payback, right? So you have the Bush funeral. You have the envelopes being handed out. Remember the envelopes? What's in that letter? What's in that letter? So you have the envelopes being handed out to all of the bad guys, we'll like to call it, at the funeral. You know, President Trump didn't get one of those envelopes. But you know who did get one of those envelopes? Mike Pence, or Mike Pounce, as we like to call him, right? And I remember at that point, we were like, wow, Pounce is a bad guy, huh? And a lot of MAGA was like, oh, don't you dare say that about Mike Pence. You know, he's a patriot. He's straight as an arrow. He's a great guy. He would never do anything to hurt President Trump. Well, I think we saw how that turned out, right? So I guess, you know, the JFK Jr. people were kind of right there, right? Mike Pence, not good, not good. So you have all that going on. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is, again, the start of Barstool Sports, right? Barstool Sports was founded in Milton, Massachusetts, right? There's a famous interview that JFK Jr. does with Imus. You remember Don Imus, right? And Don Imus actually just passed away a couple years ago, and it was shortly after, not that far after. It might have been 2019, 2020. Don Imus passed away. He was buried at College Station in Texas, right? Well, who else was buried at College Station, Texas? You have George H.W. Bush buried there as well, right? So I'm just showing you there. You have Bush was born in Milton. You had Barstool born in Milton. And, you know, Imus was buried in College Station, and so was George H.W. Bush. So is it a reach? Is it a stretch? Maybe, you know, but I found it noteworthy and figured I'd share it in the video as well. And R.I.P. to Mr. Imus as well. Not so much R.I.P. to the other guy, but, you know, we know why. So that's the Gridiron Gang in a nutshell. A lot there. I didn't stay in order. I was going all over the place. So best thing you can do is watch the video on Rumble. Gridiron Gang Saves America. The first episode, it came out on September 10th, 2020. There are some things that happened after this later down the line. In fact, September 10th of this last year, 2023, it was also the NFL kickoff weekend. And if you remember, that was one of the times where Donald Trump was kind of shown with somebody carrying a football. Not this type of football, but one of these type of footballs, right? Something that's carried in a briefcase, right? So that was on the Delta that day. You also had Tom Brady return to New England that day, as he was officially retired now. He returned to New England for the first time since he had left a couple years earlier. And then that same week, you had Mr. Portnoy. He bought back Barstool Sports for $1. So you'll see a little bit more about that in other episodes, kind of how that came about. But it was, again, for me, I'm watching all this. I'm like, oh, wow, this was all in the video 3 years ago, right? This is pretty cool. So enjoy the Gridiron Gang. Check it out. Again, one of my favorite episodes. You know, have an open mind about The Rock. I might be wrong. Maybe he does eat children. But all the people we've ever suspected of eating kids and doing that stuff, they're never out saying they do it, right? So that's where I'm gonna call shenanigans, and I'm gonna give The Rock a chance because, you know, again, Donald Trump called him his favorite wrestler. So, and I know people change, times change, right? But I think everybody's playing a role here, and you know, we'll see what happens at the end of the day. Maybe I'm wrong. So enjoy the show as always. Don't forget to subscribe to the 4VKM podcast on YouTube. We're kicking that off on 2/21/24. It's going to be great. And as always, enjoy the show. All right, forgot something. The Rock, right? So I forgot to mention Vince brings back the XFL in the year 2020, and I mentioned how COVID really ruined it at the end, right? So it goes into bankruptcy, and Vince uses a similar playbook that Donald Trump had used in terms of business bankruptcies before, and this allowed him to sell the XFL to his boy, The Rock, for $15 million, right? And the interesting thing about that is that The Rock's company that purchased the LLC that he set up to purchase the XFL, it was called Alpha Aquico. And if you put the gematria on Alpha Aquico, you get 107. So, like I said, give The Rock a chance.